What's going on? Welcome into 104.5 The Zone TV. Lucas Panzica, Will Bowling here with you. We're going to cover it all tonight. Baseball, football, a little bit of basketball sprinkled in as well. There is a lot to cover. And Lucas, looking forward to another good Thursday night edition tonight of the UT podcast. How are you, man?
I'm good, Will. Hope all is well. Hello to everybody joining us on Zone TV. Mark it down. June 2021. The greatest month of June in sports talk radio history. It's the gift that keeps on giving, unless you're Kaidon Salter. But in terms of information and topics for the Ultimate Tennessee podcast, we're loaded, man. Let's get going.
And we're going to jump right in with Tennessee baseball, and Tony Vitello ain't leaving. Officially now, not officially announced by LSU, but Jay Johnson is the guy for Louisiana State University, not Tony Vitello, the new head coach, first reported by Kendall Rogers of D1 Baseball about 45 minutes to an hour ago. So Lucas, Tennessee can't worry about LSU anymore, and all those LSU fans that were immediately trolling Tennessee after they lost to Texas, Tennessee fans are going to keep some receipts and be, I think, liking a lot of tweets today. LSU fans are pretty confident, and now they're going to go get LSU's guy.
Right, and important to note, Tony Vitello has not signed a contract extension at Tennessee,
Correct.
But a lot of indications and reports coming out of Knoxville earlier this week that Tennessee is willing to make him the highest paid college baseball coach in the country. That's a lot of the things Danny White, athletic director Danny White, has been saying sort of point to that. So, yeah, the writing is kind of on the wall there. That's the only open job that really Tennessee needed to feel threatened by as far as swooping up Tony Vitello. Although I have to say, that's a damn good hire by LSU. Jay Johnson, a guy who made 2 College World Series trips in his 6 years at Arizona, including in his first year at Arizona when they finished runners-up. So, no, they didn't get the guy that many LSU fans wanted and arguably the hottest name out there on the market, but that's a damn good hire, Jay Johnson out of Arizona.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for LSU. And Lucas, I'm interested to get your feedback on this as well, because Tony Vitello, obviously, this is not to downplay what he's done at Tennessee this year. I didn't think he was a big enough name for LSU. I mean, this is the closest thing to Alabama football that we have in the SEC in baseball. I know Vandy fans, if they're watching this, are going to be pissed at me for saying this. But look, Tennessee and Vandy have made the same amount of College World Series. Vandy is more like Clemson football. They've come on really strong in the last 10 years, and now they're as good as anybody. But it hasn't always been that way. And LSU is the perennial power. I thought the way Tony Vitello managed the loss to Texas, and we're going to talk about this loss a little bit as the show goes on tonight as well, the way he managed the loss to Texas. Look at what Tim Corbin did last night. In the 4th inning, he said some magic words, down by 4 to Stanford to get his team going, and they ended up coming back and winning the ball game. And I don't know if it happens without Tim Corbin kind of rallying his guys in the middle of the game and obviously saying something that worked and lit a fire under them. Tony Vitello had 2 pretty flat performances from his Tennessee team. And, maybe it's unfair. We're not inside the dugout. We don't know what was said and what wasn't said, but it wasn't the same impact, whatever he said, than what Tim Corbin said to his team last night. LSU is a big enough program to deserve a guy that's been there and has won on the big stage in Omaha. And, fair or unfair, Tony Vitello hasn't been able to do that yet.
Yeah, and Tim Corbin has gotten to a stage in his career where he's not just a phenomenal ball coach, one of the best to ever do it. He's a master psychologist at this point with his players, and a guy that's almost 20 years older than Tony Vitello. We got to remember, Tony Vitello is a 4th-year head coach. He had never been a head coach at any point throughout his Tennessee career. He's only, I believe, 42, maybe 43. But again, you look at the guy and you think he's one of the players, still very young in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah, absolutely. LSU is a perennial powerhouse in college baseball. Tony Vitello is kind of the hot, sexy name right now in SEC baseball, but they went out and got a guy that has been to Omaha twice just in the last 6 years, has proved he can do it repeatedly. Now, LSU fans would have been very happy with Tony Vitello, if not just for the fact that they'd be taking him away from Tennessee fans. But I think that matchup, Tennessee and LSU, West and East in the SEC, in years to come, is going to be fun to watch. Despite Tennessee sweeping LSU throughout this season, Tigers aren't going anywhere as a program, and it's cool to sort of see a foundation laid for a rivalry in that sport, right? Because we don't really get much of a rivalry between Tennessee and LSU in other sports. I think those battles are going to be really fun to watch in the coming years.
Of course, we're going to get to Kaidon Salter's departure from Tennessee football, what that means for Josh Heupel in year one. Also going to talk a little bit about the two physical freaks that Tennessee has at the NBA Combine right now. One of them just a freshman, Keon Johnson. His progress has been well documented over the past 24 hours. But Yves Pons, another guy who's turning a lot of heads and doing a lot of good things at the NBA Combine. So stay tuned. We'll talk about both of those topics coming up. But right now, your chance to interact with us on 104.5 The Zone TV. How excited are you about the future of Tennessee baseball after this College World Series run? We asked the question, Lucas, because this is the next step for Tennessee. I'd say now it's close to a 95 to 99% chance that Tony Vitello remains the head coach at the University of Tennessee for next season. It might be closer to 99.9 at this point. Does this team have the staying power? Is this the beginning of a Tennessee baseball program that can compete and can be a powerhouse in the SEC? Or was this a really veteran group that's going to be a flash in the pan? And does this team regress again next season?
From the outside looking in, I could see how it is perceived as kind of a flash in the pan, right? Because Tennessee baseball has never dominated at the forefront of college baseball until 2021. But when you look back, Will, this team's been doing it now for almost 3 years. I would argue this is the third season that this team has been playing close to this level. And not just because of last season, which I know you're going to talk about, where Tennessee was one of the hottest teams in baseball or in college baseball when COVID came through and shut everything down. Vols were 15-2. When all of that happened, they were picking up some strong momentum. And Tony said before the College World Series, I really thought that group had a significant shot to make it to Omaha, and everything they did through their first 17 games indicated that as well. But in year two of Tony Vitello, year one, he took his lumps right around 500. This team won 40 games in year two. Will, that's more than three of the teams that were at the College World Series in Omaha this year. Two of them that are already eliminated. One of them that is still there in NC State that won each of their first two games is about to play Vanderbilt on Friday with a chance to knock off the Vandy boys. 40 games in year two is one heck of a turnaround.
Yeah.
When you think about what Tennessee's program was under Dave Serrano, obviously a group that went out during the regional. But yeah, look, this team has been around now for a few years. The question is losing that core group of veterans, like you said, a group that stuck it out like the Pete Durkes and the Luke Lipsiuses from Serrano to Vitello that kind of helped bridge that gap. Tony Vitello, a coach that leaves a lot up to his players, right? He's one to, I think he said in the lightning delay in that LSU game at the Super Regional when there was a long delay, I didn't say a word to him. They had it covered. So he's a coach that's willing to do that, and veteran leadership has a lot to do with that. Tennessee loses a good bit of that leadership after this offseason, but he's a guy as a head coach that has built his career on recruiting. It's what he did at Arkansas under Dave Van Horn, and I only expect that trend to go upwards as Tennessee starts to build even more momentum and more wins like they did this year.
The bad news for Tennessee is that 6 of your 8 players in the field are likely gone, including your first 3 in the batting order, Liam Spence, Max Ferguson. I would expect Jake Rucker to leave now after his junior season. And now the 2 guys that come back, Drew Gilbert in center field, obviously a flair for the dramatic with a couple of walk-off home runs, including the grand slam against Wright State. But the best news out of that for Tennessee is that your number 1 hitting prospect on this entire roster is back. And that's Jordan Beck, who I would expect a really big year from. And he's going to have really big expectations coming in as the guy, probably at 3 or 4 in the lineup for Tennessee next season. But here are a couple names, Lucas, to remember, because now Tennessee fans get a different phase of the college baseball offseason. They're not normally used to paying attention to how many of their high school signees come to college, right? Because as Tennessee starts to recruit better, some of these names I'm about to tell you about are going to be borderline guys to come to campus or to be early draft picks. Number 1 guy is Chase Burns, one of the top pitchers out of the state of Tennessee, Beach High School. His fastball is topped out around 99 or 100 miles per hour. Guy with a lot of flair, a lot of style in the way that he pitches. That guy gets on campus, you can go ahead and slot him into the weekend rotation as a true freshman, just like we saw Blade Tidwell do this last year. Shortstop signee Ryan Spikes, the guy that's ranked right now in the top 200 prospects. His stock has risen. That's a guy you can pencil in at shortstop or second base. Logan Steenstra, a guy who you would expect to come in for Liam Spence, who's obviously gone now. Steenstra, Spikes, really, really good middle infield. And then a guy on this team that I know Tony Vitello likes a lot is Kyle Booker. Tony told me earlier on in the season, prepping for a broadcast for SEC Network Plus, he thought without the COVID year that allowed Luke Lipsius and Pete Durkee to come back, he said in any other year, Kyle Booker is playing every single day for this Tennessee team as a true freshman. That's a guy they really like. And Lucas, that's going to fill a need that this team didn't really have that speed threat at the beginning of the lineup this season. 1 through 9, you had guys that could make solid contact, that could hit for power, that could drive the baseball for extra bases. They didn't have that speed threat like we're seeing Vanderbilt have with Enrique Bradfield, who's been so tremendous. Booker is a guy who I think gives Tennessee a different dimension. We were talking about this earlier, Lucas. Tennessee was probably more talented in 2020 than it was in 2021. They had the best pitcher in college baseball in Garrett Crochet, who is lighting it up now as a Chicago White Sox as a rookie. You had Al Solari, another guy who's drafted really high, who was excellent. I'm not worried about this team's staying power because for me, they already tooled from 2020 to 2021. So what's stopping them from retooling from 21 to 22?
In 2020, team in college baseball when COVID came in and shut everything down. I believe they had just come off a win over the number 1 team in the country in Texas Tech, if I'm not mistaken. And power hitting is really what carried this team, for long stretches throughout this season. But we saw that that's not always sustainable when you get to Omaha. And that might have been a little overblown when we really dove into it. That felt like a big topic of conversation going in. I only really felt like there were 2 of those flyouts that would have been carried out of Lindsey Nelson Stadium in the Texas game. Maybe we overblew that a little bit. But yeah, a guy like Enrique Bradfield for Vanderbilt, that's my favorite player to watch in college baseball all season.
He's pretty awesome.
And he'll continue to be. So any comparison to that should get Tennessee fans excited. But it's the pitching that will carry this team if they're going to win a national championship under Tony Vitello. That was the shakiest part of this group getting into Omaha. And that is what ended this group's run with electric pitching from Andrew Abbott of Virginia and Texas as well. So, yeah, look, I don't expect there to be much of a drop-off for Tennessee baseball because we've seen no evidence to indicate that, not just from 2020 to 2021, but 2019 to 2020 and so forth.
Well, that was kind of my opinion on this team the whole season, and we'll move on to Kaidon Salter and Tennessee football here in a minute as well. But I thought this team was one arm away from being a national championship contender.
Jackson Leith away, would you say?
And Jackson Leith was that arm. And Ben Joyce, another guy who's clocked 102 on the radar gun, playing for Walter State Community College, a powerhouse up there in Northeast Tennessee as well. Another guy who would have been a huge reliever for Tennessee to put in and have more options. Because if you think about having a guy like Jackson Leith, who is going to be your Friday starter or Saturday starter this season in the weekend rotation, Blade Tidwell is probably still in the weekend rotation either way. That allows Will Heflin, who was fantastic all season, his first 2 times through the order. There's a reason for that because he doesn't have the best stuff, but he throws strikes. He commands the baseball really well. He would have been perfect for Tennessee in long relief as kind of that bullpen ace role that you see so much in college baseball. Will Heflin would have been an ace reliever for this team if you add one more guy in that starting rotation, whether it's the Burns kid from Beach, whether it's Chad Dallas, Jackson Leith, whoever ends up being in that rotation next year. That's the next piece of the puzzle we've got to figure out if you're Tennessee baseball and you know that Tony Vitello is coming back next season. Who's pitching for you? Because you've got a lot of good returners that are probably going to be back. That's going to be one of the best rotations in the SEC. And whether it's October baseball or June baseball in the NCAA, you got to have deep pitching in order to win a title. And I think Tennessee's going to have the pitching to be able to contend for another national title next season.
Yeah, and like I said, it's kind of what they lacked in Omaha ultimately to get him over the hump. But the absence of Jackson Leith might have made Chad Dallas a better pitcher because he really developed into Tennessee's reliable Friday starter, right? By the end of the season, he was pitching so well and had some lumps in Omaha. But it'll just be interesting to see what this team takes away from that experience of getting to the College World Series for the first time since 2005, not just with the younger players that will return, but for Tony Vitello too, as a young head coach. So you're right. It's been a long time since Tennessee fans were actually able to follow a baseball program with optimism throughout the offseason, but I think they have that here going into 2021.
All right, from optimism to the exact opposite. let's talk about Tennessee football. Kaidon Salter driving with a tinted license plate. He didn't
among
have
other
lights
things.
on. Yeah, among other things at 3 a.m. That created a traffic stop. He throws, let's see the exact amount. He throws some weed out of the window.
4 grams, I believe.
4 grams. There it is. Throws it out of the window. Goodness sakes. I mean, this guy, I know you're not surprised. We talked about this off the podcast right when it happened, right when it broke. And your initial thought was he's gone. I'm a little more surprised. I think if it's just simple possession, let's say this is just a weed issue, a drug issue. I mean, how many strikes did Pig Howard get when he was at Tennessee? I mean, literally.
A lot.
It was 4 or 5 chances then, but, it's a different circumstance. I think, Lucas, the reason why Kaidon Salter is not on this team today is because Josh Heupel's not the one that recruited him. I truly believe that if this is Jeremy Pruitt still coaching this team, you have a personal relationship that's lasted longer than just the couple months that Josh Heupel's been on campus, and you like your chances better of mentoring a kid and bringing him along because you've known him throughout the recruiting process. So I think that's the first part. But B, this is more about just the drug stuff. This is not taking Tennessee football seriously enough to make the right decisions and not get yourself in trouble again.
Yeah, it's tough when you're comparing coaches too, because every coach approaches it in a different way.
Right.
Pruitt was always one to stick his neck out for players in these situations. You think back to Jeremy Banks, 9 out of 10 coaches with everything Jeremy Banks did with his multiple stops with the police and other issues, they'd be gone from that team. Jeremy Banks is still with the Vols, and that's because of Jeremy Pruitt. But you're right. Josh Heupel comes in. Kaidon Salter stays committed to Tennessee despite the coaching change. But ultimately, Kaidon Salter just made this an easy decision on Josh Heupel. You come to campus maybe 2 weeks in, you're suspended for the entirety of spring practice due to a similar incident at Stokely Hall, an athletic dorm. You don't get a single snap in practice. And then a month and a half after the conclusion of spring practice, not just driving around. You see a lot of this, kids getting kicked off of teams for just having a little bit of weed. We need to legalize it and all this. That's fine. And I don't totally disagree with you.
But it's more than that.
It's driving at 3 a.m. on the Strip, Cumberland Avenue, with, like you said, not showing license or driving without a license, tinted registration, busted taillight. I mean, you're just begging to be pulled over, right?
Yeah.
And then you throw in the drug possession. Very easy decision for Josh Heupel. I feel for Kaidon Salter. I hope that wherever he ends up, he's able to take his situation a little more seriously, because you have to understand the ice that you're on as a guy who was not recruited by the current sitting head coach, and they didn't get a single rep in spring practice because of a previous incident. Can't be doing that again. I'll repeat it. He made this a very easy decision for Josh Heupel, in my opinion.
Let us know what you think. Do you think it was the right decision for Kaidon Salter to be released from the Tennessee football program? You can comment with us on Periscope, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube at 1045 The Zone. And specifically, if you're watching on Facebook Live, comment !notify, and you're going to get notifications every time 1045 The Zone goes live. That way you never miss a moment of all of our coverage right here on 1045 The Zone TV, starting at 6 a.m. with J. Martin Ramon, and typically finishing up around 6 or 7 o'clock, like we will tonight, with digital originals as well, right here on 1045 The Zone. Here's the other aspect of this for me, Lucas. I think even if Josh Heupel is in his second season, he's not as willing to make Kaidon Salter an example, right? Because this kind of opens Pandora's box. It's a little bit of a slippery slope for Josh Heupel if he doesn't set the standard of discipline and what that's going to be immediately upon arriving on campus. I think the timing of all of this has to play a really big role, because if this is not even the first offense, say this is year 2, this is this time next year, I'm not so sure Josh Heupel is kicking Kaidon Salter off the team, because he has to set the standard of discipline now. Otherwise, this is going to get out of control really, really quickly with everything that's gone on with Tennessee over the last couple of months. Is that a fair position for me to have at this point?
Well, is he not kind of setting the standard for discipline now?
That's what I'm saying, is that he has to. But like if this is already set, or if you don't have as many incidents in year 1 and you're in year 2, you get to know these guys a little better. I don't know. I think there's a lot more at play here than obviously the marijuana part that we've talked about. But I think the timing of Heupel getting on campus and trying to create a culture where nobody's getting in trouble for anything, better or worse than this, however you want to look at it. I think him trying to set that example now is a big reason why he's kind of coming down with a heavy fist right here.
Yeah, I mean, look, we still have a lot to learn, too, about Josh Heupel and the kind of culture he's going to create at Tennessee. He's been there just a few months, and all we know is he wants to bring a fun, exciting brand of offense, and they have a lot of fun with ice cream trucks and playing dodgeball, right? Like that's pretty much what we know from the first few months of the Josh Heupel era, and that's fine. I don't know how he would have handled this a year from now. I'm maintaining, Will, if this is year 4, 5, or 6 of Josh Heupel, that it's the same result. I mean, this is a quarterback. This is a guy that is supposed to be fighting an uphill battle in a very crowded quarterback room, by the way, which I know we're going to get to here in just a second, in a very crowded quarterback room with a mountain to climb as a new guy who wasn't recruited by this head coach. I mean, you're a quarterback. You got to show some type of intelligence and leadership, which means not doing dumb stuff like driving around at 3 a.m. without your license and weed in the car after you've been suspended from the entirety of spring practice and haven't taken a single practice rep. So for me, if this is a freshman that Heupel himself recruited a couple of years down the road and it's the exact same scenario where he misses all of spring and does this again, I think he's gone. I mean, Josh Heupel, an offensive guy, no player on this team. Heupel needs to have more trust in his quarterbacks than any other player on this team with this offensive system and how much is laid on the shoulders of Tennessee's quarterback under Heupel. So I think it's the same result regardless. And again, we have a lot to learn about what Josh Heupel's culture will be at Tennessee as a head coach. But situations like this, I have a feeling it won't be very Jeremy Pruitt-esque as far as really sticking your neck out and trying to keep guys in the program, especially when it comes to quarterbacks.
Remember when I said that Kaidon Salter was the thing I was looking forward to most about Tennessee football this year?
I was going to bring that up.
I don't know what else there is.
You just have Josh Heupel's pedigree of scoring points and quarterback play. I mean, look, I don't know how much of an impact Kaidon Salter would have had on this QB room, if we're being honest, because you bring in a guy from Michigan and Joe Milton, who has had plenty of hype surrounded around him before in his career. You bring in a guy like Harrison Bailey, obviously very highly touted in high school, who got reps last season, and that's not even mentioning Brian Maurer and Hendon Hooker, a transfer that you brought in from Virginia Tech with starting experience. I would have been shocked if Kaidon Salter was Tennessee's starting quarterback this season.
This was another thing that was brought up on J. Martin Ramon this morning. I know Ron Slay was hanging out with them this morning and said, I think the other piece of this is, I don't know if he was living up to the hype. I mean, of course, it's hard to live up to any hype when you don't get to officially practice with the team.
Talking about Salter?
Yeah, talking about Kaidon Salter in the first semester on campus. But to me, almost his position actually lends itself more to Heupel giving him the benefit of the doubt, because Josh Heupel's most hands-on with the quarterbacks. I mean, if there's any position, I think, where a guy could get in trouble a little bit more, I think it would be the quarterbacks. Obviously, that's a very abstract statement for me to say, but Josh Heupel, for me, is dealing personally most one-on-one of any position group with that quarterback room. And so if there's any position where Josh Heupel is going to be molding a guy on and off the field, you'd think it would be the quarterback position. I'm just not sure. He didn't do himself any favors by missing spring practice. That's the other thing. I mean, if he'd put any work at all on the football field, in the classroom, if he put any good work, good example on the field that would back him up, I think we're having a different conversation. It's again, the timeline of doing this within a couple months. I'm starting to come around to the idea that, look, I don't know if Josh Heupel had any other choice than to use this example and to say, look, guys, like, even if you make these two mistakes a year apart, it might be the same thing, but definitely not just a couple of months apart.
In a couple months into your college football career.
I know. I mean, as a freshman.
And on that same note, Josh Heupel will likely have a closer relationship with his quarterbacks than anybody else, but shouldn't he expect more of his quarterbacks on that note than anybody else? I think quarterbacks will be held to a higher standard within this program because he is spending more time with them than anybody. That leads to more disappointment than if any other position did this. I think Blaine Bishop said this today or yesterday on Blaine and Mickey, and I'll butcher it because in the most Blaine Bishop-esque way. Your defensive lineman can be a knucklehead. Your linebacker, middle linebacker can be a knucklehead. Your starting left tackle can be a knucklehead. Your quarterback can't. He just can't. And if I'm Josh Heupel, I'm saying, Kaidon, if you wanted to show me that you gave an ounce of a damn about your college football career at Tennessee, you wouldn't have done half the things you did coming in, regardless of what you think about if a player should be kicked off a team or not because he had some weed. It's about a player knowing what the expectations are and what consequences are if he's caught doing these things and doing them anyway, and doing them in a much dumber fashion, not to be brash, but just a much dumber fashion than normal. It's not just he was smoking in his dorm. It's he was driving without a license and a tinted registration and busted taillight at 3 a.m. with weed. For me, that's grounds to kick anybody off the team, especially a quarterback.
Last thing on this before we move on to some other news around Tennessee football. To me, this could be an equal reflection on Jeremy Pruitt or Josh Heupel. I'm curious to get your thoughts on who this reflects more on, because this is not the only discipline-related issue, the law issue that Tennessee has had. I know Aaron Beasley today reinstated to Tennessee's football team. His charges were actually dropped against him, the animal cruelty charge that he had against him. Which,
Trey Wallace reporting,
which is an interesting end to that story, because I think a lot of people kind of assumed the worst, which that's what people do on Twitter. And that was probably a little unfair of, a lot of Tennessee fans and reporters who assumed that, all that was going on was exactly the case. I think, maybe we didn't know the full story at the beginning there, but, Josh Heupel at some point, this is a big opportunity for him to create a better culture of discipline and to kind of get guys in line. But to you, is this Josh Heupel not having enough control on his current program, or is this more a reflection on Jeremy Pruitt and the kind of guys that he was bringing into this program?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't call this an indictment on Josh Heupel whatsoever. And it's not just that.
I think I'm with you.
Yeah, I think that's very hard to do. It's Brandon Davis, getting allegedly shot by a teammate on accident at Uptown Bar that Heupel had to deal with. It's the Aaron Beasley thing he had to deal with, and the Kaidon Salter thing. No, I don't think it's fair yet to put this criticism on Josh Heupel. He has not had enough of a handle on this program to be responsible for a lot of things that happened before players even really got to know him as Tennessee's head coach. So give it a year from now, and we'll see where Tennessee is at with these situations before I think you can give fair criticism to Josh Heupel and blaming him for these type of situations.
I've talked about this before on this podcast and elsewhere. What I want at Tennessee are winners on and off the field. I mean, this was something Jeremy Pruitt really looked for on the field. He really liked guys. Jalen Hyatt is maybe the best example that were playing for and winning state championships in their individual states. Kaidon Salter was actually another really good example of that at Cedar Hill out there in Texas, I believe. A powerhouse program who made an incredible run in the Texas playoffs, which is certainly no small feat. Yeah. But what about the winners off the field? I mean, like this apathy towards having any pride in the University of Tennessee. We talked about this with Henry To'oTo'o and all that transfer stuff, which, by the way, now he's taking pictures in an Alabama jersey wearing a Tennessee bracelet as he's taking his headshots in Alabama jerseys, which is an interesting development over the last weekend as well. But give me guys who are winners, not just in state championships, but off the field who you don't have this kind of thing happening. This is a good opportunity for Heupel to reset and bring in a different kind of player and a different kind of culture to this program.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And for me, it's just about being smart, man. It's just being smart. And we have had this conversation about pride in university. We went back and forth on it a little bit. Like, I don't think the majority of Tennessee, Trey Smith is an exception, but I don't think the majority of players that signed with Tennessee are doing it for Tennessee or having pride in the university. They're doing it, for their own development and their future and their relationship with coaches. A reason why you see so many players go to the transfer portal or follow coaches that have been fired and hired somewhere else. I think that is dying more and more with every passing year in college football. But for me, it's just about being smarter. An 18-year-old me or an 18-year-old you can probably do some of these things that Kaidon Salter did without crazy big consequences. Maybe your parents make you come home for a semester before letting you go back to school, But with Kaidon Salter, he's an 18-year-old kid. He's just a freshman in college, but there's so much more on his shoulders. He's a quarterback, a highly recruited quarterback at an SEC program, at a historic SEC program with a scholarship and everything that comes with that. So the consequences are going to be much bigger. I understand kids can be immature, but that's your quarterback. You got to be smarter. Kaidon Salter was not smart in his first 3 months at Tennessee. I really don't want to beat the dead horse and feel like I'm bashing the guy. Like, I really hope he moves on and finds success somewhere. I really do.
He's a kid.
Yeah, and he's so talented. I followed him when I was writing for Vols Wire. I think I followed him. I wrote on every game he had at Cedar Hill. He was incredible at that program, a very high-profile program in the state of Texas, where he was one of the best players in the state. So he's obviously extremely talented, and I hope he really finds success elsewhere, but he's going to have to be smarter if he's going to do it.
So is Keon Johnson about to join the underused at Tennessee club? With Cordero Patterson, with Alvin Kamara, with Cam Sutton, I'd put him in there. Justin Coleman, another guy I'd put in there, honestly. Like, this dude is an absolute freak. 48 inches, breaking the NBA combine record by 2.5 inches. I mean, that's
on a vertical, yeah.
No small feat on a vertical. His standing vertical, 41. I mean, this dude in a league for me, I'm as far from an NBA guy as you could possibly be. I don't like it. I don't enjoy watching it. I don't think it's an entertaining product until the conference finals. So literally now is when I start tuning in, which
it is now
a little bit.
It is now.
I think it is now. I just don't tune into the fourth quarter because with a review after every play and timeouts that advance the ball, like it just takes 45 minutes for the final quarter. I digress. I think Keon Johnson is a perfect super defensive guy. Jump out of the gym, a role player kind of. I mean, he's probably a little bit better than a role player. He can't shoot a lot. Mike Wilson has told me on the record on this podcast that that's the easiest thing to fix is someone's shot. So, maybe there's hope for him there as well. But this dude's going to make a lot of money, at least playing defense and blocking shots at the guard position for a little while.
Yeah, and speaking of on the record, that's something Ron Slay alluded to this morning on J. Martin Ramon. He had a good sit down with Rick Barnes while they were at the spring game just a couple of months ago. And Rick Barnes was very candid with Slay. He said that was one of his bigger regrets of this season was not getting everything out of Keon Johnson, because you saw the talent. You saw it in so many spurts when he took over a game at Kentucky with 27 points, when he posterized that Georgia player in one of the best dunks in recent Tennessee basketball history. You saw it in spurts, but it just never really came together for this team. And it's going to be disappointing every time you watch Keon Johnson in the NBA, and Jaden Springer, throw him in that mix as well. And Rick Barnes, I know when Slay was talking about it, kind of talked about the lead up to the season and the stop and go with the COVID and the shutdowns and the lack of practice time together, and how that impacted the camaraderie of the team and how much importance Barnes puts in that. You can sit there and go through all of those things, but at the end of the day, Keon Johnson, they did not get everything out of him at Tennessee. He's one of the most talented players to ever come through that program, and certainly he was underutilized when you consider a first-round exit and no real championships or major season accomplishments to come away with. So, yeah, I think, Will, it's going to be one of those constant reminders. I don't know if he's going to be as big a star as Alvin Kamara,
right,
but Keon Johnson's not going anywhere. We're breaking combine records. Throw Yves Pons in there as well. I saw this from Jonathan Givney, an NBA draft analyst, talking about Yves Pons. Yves Pons had a strong first day at the NBA combine, especially in terms of his shooting. Was lights out in the drills and even showed some shooting off movement potential in the three-point star shooting drill. Brought great energy as always. Yves Pons, noted three-point shooter at Tennessee, right? I say that kind of facetiously. Right. He's just a defensive guy, a freak athlete who Tennessee did get a good bit out of. SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Hard to argue with that. But, you hope this doesn't become kind of a common theme in the Rick Barnes era. Now that he is getting talent, as in five-star, high-profile talent, Kennedy Chandler, Jemai Masak, you hope this doesn't become a trend in the NBA draft moving forward.
Yeah, and the last thing here before we wrap up, too, I think Rick Barnes has a really small formula of ways he knows how to win at Tennessee or anywhere. It's what he's always done. It's having an elite point guard and an elite big man. And Tennessee last season didn't have the elite point guard. And John Fulkerson, who was supposed to be the elite big man, just didn't really live up to the high expectations that Tennessee fans and that I think that he had for himself a year ago. You have all of those things this year. You have one of the best point guards in college basketball next year in Kennedy Chandler. You have, of course, John Fulkerson coming back and talking to Slay about this as well. He's going to be better with a point guard forcing him the ball, which I don't think Santiago Vescovi did a good enough job of last season when he was running the point for Tennessee. And, of course, you got Brandon Huntley Hatfield, who's one of the top power forwards coming in as a freshman. This fits more the classic Rick Barnes style teams that have been his best teams. He didn't know how to use Keon Johnson. He didn't know how to use Jaden Springer. Just putting the ball in their hands as point guards didn't work. I don't think Rick Barnes adapted well enough to the talent he had. I also didn't think the talent he had adapted well enough to what Rick Barnes wanted. I have more confidence in this team and the way that it's constructed. This is the most balanced team Tennessee's ever had under Rick Barnes. I can confidently say that. They've got more depth at every position. Justin Powell really helps them out at the shooting guard position as a shooter. So I think that certainly bodes well for Tennessee moving forward and having less overused guys moving forward into this season. Quickly before we get out of here, Lucas, big recruiting weekend. Josh Heupel needs it. A couple of transfers that are, still thinking about Tennessee, including one corner who I know is still in the mix and set to announce soon, but a big weekend on Rocky Top for sure.
Especially in terms of offense, which is, of course, what Josh Heupel is building this program around. It is his MO. And we start with Branson Robinson, the 4-star running back out of Germantown High School in Jackson, Mississippi, the number 3 running back in the country, number 1 player in Mississippi, a bruising runner, 5'10", 220, some explosiveness in him. I read David Ubben of The Athletic call him the highest rated prospect to officially visit so far in the Josh Heupel era. I mean, 4-star wide receiver Cameron Miller from Memphis, Cody Burns, one of his primary recruiter. Will, I think Cody Burns, a guy we're going to be constantly talking about in conversations regarding high-profile Tennessee recruiting targets in terms of what he did at Auburn, Tennessee's wide receivers coach. I think we'll see his name attached to a lot of big players. Jaden Gibson, a 4-star wideout from Florida. And one guy in state that I really like, Caden Pope, Will, a 3-star wideout from Hardin County High School in Savannah, Tennessee. I got to call a game, believe his sophomore year, a playoff game in Savannah, a sneaky talented player, only 3-star athlete, Auburn, Kentucky, Mississippi State, some of the schools gunning after him. Keep an eye on Caden Pope, a twitchy guy utilized in a lot of different ways at Hardin County. And then 3-star defensive lineman Vincent Sneed, already a Tennessee commit, will be on campus. But this is where it'll get interesting to see how much progress Tennessee can make with some higher profile wide receivers. What did Bayless Jones call this offense for wide receivers, Will? Do you remember what he said this spring?
It was a receiver's dream, right?
A receiver's dream. So will top, the blue chip, high-rated high school wide receivers be attracted to this offense? That'll be interesting to keep an eye on how that develops after this weekend as commits start to come down, final, decisions in terms of top 5, top 3 with a lot of these prospects. This is a big weekend, arguably the biggest weekend of the Heupel era so far in recruiting, especially on offense.
And we'll be here next week to recap it all right here back on 104.5 The Zone TV, likely going back to Wednesdays where we will typically be every single week right here, 6:30. And we'll continue talking Tennessee with you guys. If you missed any of the show tonight, you can watch the full archive here in about 30 seconds when this stream ends, or you can check it out later tonight. Ultimate Tennessee Podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe. Make it easier for folks to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and Stitcher. And for Lucas Panzica, I'm Will Bowling. We will talk to you next Wednesday night right here